I took a lot of time off when my nan was dying to be with her at the end of her life. And so for me, but like I couldn't have done that if I didn't have financial resources. I couldn't have just quit my job and just been like, I'm going to get a part-time job and hang out with my nan loads. And it was like the best thing I've ever done. And I think, when we're on top of our money and we have that wiggle room for when stuff does come up in life, it's just so important. But it's really easy to kind of not do that as well.
Hey, I'm Tanya Wilkinson, and this is Death on the Daily, bringing the conversation about death out of the shadows and into the mainstream. Because along with birth and change, if there's one thing that's going to happen to us all, then death is it. And we're going to explore how death actually shows up for us on the daily in a multitude of ways, and how when we allow ourselves to accept and to be with death, how it can teach us a whole heap about how to live this life well. We all know the saying, and we cannot escape from the fact that money makes the world go round. What this means is that when someone who we love dies, that money and our grief can interconnect in ways that are completely new and completely confusing. And actually, as I sit here thinking, finances in general can be confusing for a lot of us and can bring up a lot when it comes to mindset. And I hope that today's episode of Death on the Daily can empower you, not just in financial planning from the perspective of death and inheritance, but for how money mindset, planning, and taking little actions regularly can become the fuel for a whole lot of living life well. Because as my guest today shares, financial freedom is much more than just stacking up the cash Scrooge McDuck style. It's being able to drop everything to care for that family member who's dying. It's being able to do more of the simple joys in life, and is ultimately very personal to you. Hannah Mayfield is the founder of What is Wealth. She's a financial advisor who's focused on keeping things simple, including, as you'll hear, breaking down the world of investing into something that even I can understand. And Hannah's money story interconnects with the grief of losing her dad in her early 20s. And as you'll hear in this episode, her grief and her inheritance brought up a lot for her, which have taken Hannah on a powerful journey in her life. So Hannah, welcome to Death on the Daily.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Oh, and this is such an important conversation that we're going to have, because obviously money is everywhere, and money is also a big part of our stories when potentially it comes to death and inheritance. And this is where I want to start with you, Hannah, because your dad's death ultimately set you on a path to becoming a financial expert and the work that you do now to empower others. So I'd love to hear about your dad, your journey navigating grief and inheritance, and how your money story really interconnects with your grief.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, the whole grief and money thing I kind of ignored for a really long time. And I used to work in fashion and really tried to put the money side of things after my dad died, like, to the side and kind of ignore it. Because obviously, you just want your life to be like you thought it was going to be and normal, and have my dad there, and then you have this money, and I just couldn't handle it, like it was too much. And I think at the time it was such a big responsibility that I just kind of carried on with my life plan as normal. So I was 22 when my dad died and he was 56. So it was also this whole thing of, you really, I think it shifts the whole way you see life and your time being really valuable. And when you get seeing someone fight for their life, it just gives you a whole different perspective on life. I don't have the ability anymore to really float through life on autopilot. You really feel like, okay, this is something to be really intentional about. And I might be in that position one day, and I don't want to be sat there looking back on my life thinking I didn't take my chances or I didn't make the most of it. I think being in those situations gives you such a different perspective on life, and that spending time with the people you care about is the best thing, and that's the most important thing. And then I guess it all entwines with money, because our relationship between time and money is so linked. Often we spend lots of time earning money, and if you have that perspective of, okay, my time is this really precious and valuable thing that people, that you would fight for, and you would want to be able to spend with your family and things like that, but then our money is, we spend so much time to earn the money, and like, how does that all interlink?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like a really interesting topic. But yeah, I just ignored it for ages. And I was really focused on, like, what's the meaning of life? And just obviously just dealing with grief and everything and all of the other stuff that comes along when someone dies and all the practical bits. And then I think I just got quite, like, existential about stuff and was like, okay, why are we here? Like, started going down like a philosophical studies and yoga and like trying to find the answers, I guess, because I don't think like I grew up in the UK, the culture's great around death and,
Mm-hmm.
it's, tricky to navigate.
Yeah.
So yeah, basically I just ignored it for ages. And then I guess when I was finally kind of like, okay, I'm going to take, I need to figure this out, I really started learning about money. And I'd grown up with a single mum. So my story around money or everything I'd learned about it was just kind of spend as little as possible. So I was like good with money and saving in that kind of respect, but I had no idea what people who had any money did with it. Like the concept of having like spare money was not ever something that I'd really had growing up. So it was like, okay, what do people do with money? And it was this whole other world. And then started to learn about investing and, so, really taking responsibility with money and like, I think it helped. I started to see myself as a custodian of the money, and kind of like, I think to start out with it, I had to give myself that kind of like one step removal from it, maybe, because I was like, oh, it didn't really feel like my money. So I was like, okay, this is something that I want to be a really responsible custodian of. And like my dad had worked his whole life and didn't get to spend this, like he didn't make it to retirement. So like, how can I, I was only 22 when my dad died, but I was like, okay, if I have children, like I really want this to be like maybe his legacy that I can have, make it last kind of thing. So yes, like learning about all the investing stuff, and then started sharing it with my friends, everything I'd learned. And then they kind of started shifting some money from savings to investments and started, making a lot of money. And then I kind of realized, like, oh, this is really unfair. If you don't have people around you to have these conversations with about money, if you're not in that kind of circle, you'll just never benefit from this. And then it kind of became a thing for my career. And then, trained as a financial advisor, but wanted to go down the financial education route with people. So yeah, it's just a whole, life's just so random sometimes, isn't it? Like things just happen and then you're just on these different paths and you're just kind of navigating life and all the things that come up with it.
Yeah, and particularly when we lose someone, and particularly when your dad died when you were so young and he was so young too. What's your dad's name, by the way?
Oh, Daniel.
Daniel.
Yeah, Dan. Yeah.
When
It's
you're
funny because you never really say that. You're always like dad. You don't really say your parents'
yeah.
name.
I'm
Yeah.
always conscious when I do ask that when it's someone whose parent it is, because I'm like, yeah, you would never call him, hi Daniel.
Yeah.
His name is Dad. But obviously at 22, that is so young. And what I could really hear in what you was sharing was actually there is a process of grief to happen, and actually that it's okay to be able to say, actually right now I'm just in the processing of the grief, or looking deeper into the meaning of life and where I want my life to flow and what's most important. And then at the right time, then being able to say, actually, now let's look at that money. Because actually I think that's something that always comes through for me when it comes to grief journeys, of there is no rush and there's no right.
Yeah.
Some people might, as soon as they know about their inheritance, jump straight on it, and that's okay, that's their story. But for others, it's, I need the time and that space. But also what I could hear there is just how complicated it can be as well, in because there's almost, what I could feel is there's that processing of both the grief, but also then, to your point around what does that integrate into my life, into my future planning, because when we lose someone, that can put a different perspective on all of our dreams and our assumptions as well around the future. So what I could hear really strongly in there is actually there's also a lot of complicated things that can come up to just be thought through along the way as you're processing, obviously, the grief alongside the money side. For you as well, as you're in your work and you're empowering others to be able to, whether it's through inheritance or just through any money as it flows in, be able to understand around investing and empowering us to, I suppose, make our money work harder than it would do to sat in our current account. And your mission is very much rooted in that, making money simple. And when it comes to that future facing and planning for our future, and that includes obviously us not knowing when our end of life will happen, but planning for, I suppose, that final chapter, perhaps it's after retirement, if we make it that far, and then the inheritance that we leave. What do you think that we need to get started? So I'm 38 now. What would someone like me need to be thinking about now? Where would I need to get started to be able to put myself in the very best position for me and my family?
I think I have this joke now. I say like pensions have become my love language, and I like had never thought about a pension before. And then when you start kind of understanding things on finance, you realize like, oh, you do need a lot of money to be able to sustain yourself in retirement.
Mm.
And actually, you do need to be accumulating quite a lot into your pension. And also, time is really helpful. Like, it's so much more helpful for your money to grow over this long period of time. And that kind of, I think that, I can't remember the exact stat, but I think it's like £1 that you put in your pension when you're 25 is the equivalent of like £5.50 you have to put in when you're 45 for it to do the same job for you in retirement. I might have to fact check my numbers, but it's something like that, because it's not this linear thing.
Mm-hmm.
So starting sooner makes a big difference. And I just think we're not taught any of this stuff in school.
Yeah.
So yeah, honestly, the pension thing is a big one. And I did a workshop last week, and actually people were really loving the pension conversation. They're like, I'm going to, like figure out how much I've got and like track down my old ones. And I think that's a really big one, because it's so easy to just kind of forget about as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And obviously I think savings are amazing. Kind of, if you can get yourself to a point where you've paid off any of your really expensive debt, like overdrafts and credit cards, and get an emergency fund together, is the way I think about money. I always say that financial freedom is the ability to say no. So like, no, I don't want to do that job. No, I don't want to be in this situation. And having that kind of savings is so helpful. And sometimes it can be really like hard to prioritize because it's quite intangible. You're just like, oh, I don't know what it's for. And like, you could buy loads of stuff or do different things with your money. You'd have like an immediate feeling too. But like for me, I'm always like, oh, the ability to have autonomy over your time and make different decisions is like my number one thing with finances, and why I have like quite, I'm very strategic about where I put my money. And like one of the reasons for me is I took a lot of time off when my nan was dying to be with her at the end of her life. And so for me, but like I couldn't have done that if I didn't have financial resources. I couldn't have just quit my job and just been like, I'm going to get a part-time job and hang out with my nan loads. And it was like the best thing I've ever done. And I think, when we're on top of our money and we have that wiggle room for when stuff does come up in life, it's just so important. But it's really easy to kind of not do that as well.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, that really resonates with me. I had the gift of, when I just left Formula One, of very purposefully working part-time, but actually that was because of my hypothyroid and allowing my body time to heal. But then the gift was I got to spend my granddad's final year spending a day with him and my nan at their care home. And it is such a gift. And what really resonated as you were sharing that is that word, that freedom, financial freedom. But what does that bring? Because actually, I think in our society, we get so eyes on the prize from the perspective of the stack of cash, but not actually thinking about what does it mean by way of my life. And what is freedom in my life? Is it, that I can drop everything and can spend a significant amount of time with my family at any point? Or what is truly most important to us? And to the point around when people die and sort of really starting to look for that meaning, I also think that's one of the gifts that grief can give us, is just stepping us out of the system for a moment to go, oh, it's really not all about that next promotion and pay rise, is it? That's not really why we're here.
It gives you really very zoomed out, it's like the big picture. And, I find it very hard to get stressed about stuff now, because I'm like, I'm literally like, this isn't life or death. Like, this just isn't a big deal. It just gives you such a different take on things sometimes as well.
Yeah, so true. I remember in F1, my boss used to always say it's PR, not ER. But did we embody that? Not really. We'd be like,
Yeah.
we are not here. Still doing like jazz hands and stressing about everything.
From like 9 p.m. at night.
Yeah, but you are right. When that lightning bolt comes through or that light switch, it's just like, it's just not worth it. It really, really isn't. And I suppose with that in mind, and because I think I mean, you can tell me otherwise, but I know from my 20s, I was definitely not very good with money, and it used to cause me a lot of stress. It used to be something, particularly around that debt. I was the classic, spent way too much money on crap that had a short, fast fashion shelf life, makes my toes curl a little bit, and then ended up with the credit cards and then put that onto a loan to pay off the credit cards, and then ended up slowly chipping away at that loan and kicking myself around what I'd done. So that really weighed on me. And when you work with people, I'm guessing mindset is a really, really big thing when it comes to money. And also, am I right in thinking that it also, that can be really influenced as well by our backgrounds and our families and sort of all of those stories that are, I guess, travel up the path with us?
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting, all of our psychology around it. And I remember I read this first book around money like years ago. And then I kind of realized I never, because everything you believe about money is so unconscious. And then I read this book and I was like, I'm really weird with money. Like I've been taught some weird stuff. You know, like I feel like maybe most people have. I don't know. I was like, I was more like fearful around spending, and, you know, I don't know, I can't even remember all the things, but this book like really highlighted. And I was like, you know, this things of being like, you'll never be able to earn that much. And like a lot of the kind of mindset around like how much money it was even possible to have and things like that. Yeah. And then when you kind of realize like, oh yeah, I believe that because I learned this growing up, and you start to connect the dots, it's quite powerful. And like when you realize like, oh, okay, I do that probably because of that. And maybe this is something I could believe that's more helpful. And I was saying the other day that I think there's two kind of types of spenders. Maybe people like fluctuate between the two, but I think there's like default yeses who are just like, yeah, I'll get that. And there are some people who are default no, and they're just like in their head, they're like, no, you know, I can't think they can't have anything. And I think, you know, maybe some there's a middle ground to be had, but I feel like there might be a bit of a default with people. We all have these different kind of personalities around money, and
Wow, I love that. And even being able to bring that awareness in. Am I a default yes, default no? And
yeah,
is that helpful? Do I need to find more of the gray area and more I guess conscious discernment? Because I can really feel that I've definitely been rooting in, particularly I think as a small business owner, when you step away, I stepped away from the monthly paycheck and just having that. The only thing I really had to fight for in money was at the pay rise or the promotion time. And then I would also really undervalue myself. But it's a whole different ballgame when you step into being a small business owner, and it's complicated. And actually I found there's been things. I remember I was doing one workshop and I just was so charitable that I effectively was like, yeah, and I'll just give this away for free. So what am I doing? I'm supposed to be promoting something that I said like, wow. But having that moment, I remember that night I couldn't sleep, and I really felt it within me. I was like, oh, I've just shone a spotlight on something. I've got to go into why is it difficult for me to ask for money? And I went all the way back through my career and I was like, it's always been difficult for me to ask for money. Why? And actually then going back through the path and connecting into my family, I realized why. But I guess actually almost it is for me, there's sort of that softer link into death. But I guess it can be really healing ancestrally when we can become really aware of our money patterns and what are our defaults. Because actually if we can become aware of it, then that means that for future generations we're potentially not going to be passing them on, or not passing them on in the same way. So yeah, I think it could be that for me is just my head's just gone to that, like the deeper empowerment of what you do.
yeah. And I think you're right, especially if you start to work for yourself, you have to take 100% responsibility for your finances, because no one's going to give you sick pay, no one's going to pay your pension. You know, you have to really like take control of your finances and where you're going. And you can't, like, to a certain extent in a corporate job, you can float a bit more because you're kind of probably getting some pension contributions and, you know, you're entitled to a few things and you're getting that paycheck and you can kind of cruise control a bit more. But I think if you work for yourself, you need to be like, okay, where am I going? What do I need for my future self? Like, do I need insurances in place? You just have to take a deeper level of responsibility with money and like generating money and revenue. And it's a whole thing. Yeah. Pricing yourself, negotiating or whatever, pitching yourself. I think someone said to me once that starting your own business is like personal development boot camp or, you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is the steepest. Yeah. I think you can cruise that. For me, corporate was that cruise control, corporate comfort zone all the way through. But yeah, I think that's really, really powerful. And yeah, but equally within money, what I can feel is therefore there is that development opportunity too, if you can become that CFO mindset for your business, which I definitely did. The first year I was like not putting money aside for tax, just assuming it would all work out and then being like, oh my God. So yeah, it's a whole new things to learn in that space.
And I think what you're saying about the ancestral thing, like sometimes it shocks me. It was only in 1975 that women were allowed, you know, full financial autonomy and to get their own credit cards and loans and mortgages and things and bank accounts. And
wow.
so it's really not that long ago. Like and you know, it's actually quite a new thing to be able to do all of this and like really have this level of financial autonomy. Like for me as a woman, it's pretty new, you know, if you think about it. Yeah.
That is wild. But
yeah, it's crazy. It's really like 50 years ago. It's not that long ago.
Really not long ago at all. So yeah, there's a lot of these money patterns that if we can be empowered, we can help.
Yeah, we might not have seen that many role models of people being in there, you know, power of money.
Oh my goodness, that's just you literally just blow my mind.
Yeah,
right there.
You're like, now I think about it. Yeah,
you're like, oh my goodness. And because what I'm really aware of as well is just how inclusive you are in everything that you do, and really it is that empowerment and that education for anyone who wants to come in. So if someone is sat here thinking, okay, this conversation has sparked me to think I need to do something. You obviously mentioned pensions is a really good place to start. But for anyone, and I'm thinking particularly as well in that self-employed space, maybe somewhere outside of corporate, if anyone's thinking, I don't have much disposable income to be able to plan for my and my family's future, what would you suggest to them?
I think if you maybe you need to just think about the essentials. So I think stuff like insurance is really important to think about as well. Like if I'm really, it's kind of a sensible perspective. And like I do think if we're on the, you know, the subject of estate planning, inheritance planning, and like what happens if you die, you know, like what would happen and what are the financial ramifications of that? And, you know, even if you are someone, maybe you don't, you're like a stay-at-home mum or something, let's give that example. So you might say like, oh, you know, there's no income, but if you weren't there, like that would be a very costly thing maybe for someone to pay for all the stuff that you do. So it's like, yeah, if you share a mortgage with someone and, you know, just thinking about like, what do you need to have in place, I think but also just being organized with things is really helpful. I think if you like with my mum, sometimes I'm like, Mum, please do not stitch me up when you die. Like I actually can't cope with like a big, you know, like loads of paperwork in the wrong place or like you've done something funny. Like, can you please just have everything? I just want a nice, smooth, easy, you know, we have these like open conversations about it. And
that's so good.
Yeah. And and you know, like same for me as well. Like I don't want to, you know, I want everything to be left in a good place.
Yeah. I think that's so powerful because we do avoid talking about death. And to your point, if we don't know where money is, what banks, what, you know, the passwords that are essential for things or whatever it might be, it makes it really, really complicated. Actually, last year had the founders of the Dead Book on here for just that conversation. And Trip, his mother died and he was an only child and he was 31 and he was suddenly sole executor for her estate. And he said actually as he was grieving the fact that his mum left what she'd called her dead book, which is why the company's called Dead Book, and told him this is where it is, that is the reason why it was just so much easier for him, and it gave him the space then to be able to, around the admin side, be able to actually just really sink into his grief, versus I suppose what probably quite often happens, which is that we're going to have to turn the whole house upside down to find all the information to work out where it is. And also on that point around the insurance side, that was something I hadn't thought about until I was speaking to a friend, and they were like, have you got life insurance, so that if I died, that my husband basically wouldn't stand to potentially lose the house if he couldn't afford the mortgage or anything like that. So to that point, there is so much stuff that can be done that is really, really empowering and does just bring that security in. I think we all want to feel safe and secure, and we want to make sure that our family are after we're gone, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. And there's so many things, and they're just, they're quite boring, tedious jobs on the list. But if you have it in place, like I've been meaning to do for ages, my power of attorney, which is if something happens to you and you kind of are not of a sound mind, it's kind of saying, oh, this person can make decisions for me and just take over. And by the time you need that and it's not in place, it's a bit too late. Like you want to have that in place, but then it's not a real urgent thing on the to-do list. And I think often with finances, sometimes it's just really easy to kind of put it on the back burner and a non-urgent job. And it's, there's all these things and it's really easy not to do them. I've still got, little niggly tasks like that I need to sort out.
Yeah, I definitely got ones on my list. It's true that like life admin takes
Yeah.
back seat, but if we can get it done, then obviously there is benefits. And yeah, the power of attorney, I forget, when I trained as a end of life doula, I think it's around 6 in the UK. It's 6, don't quote me on this. Anyone who's listening, look it up for the official things, but it's not an instant thing, so it does take a number of weeks, I think around 6 weeks, for that to be enforced. So yeah, it isn't something where, if for anyone who's got a diagnosis or something and suddenly they need to be able to have people stepping in and having that legal assurance. So yeah, there's definitely all of these. I think it sounds complicated, but in my experience, it really is just identifying those tasks and then just take them one step at a time, isn't it? One at a time, tick them off that list, just keep flowing with it, and we'll all get there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I get it. It's on my list still.
Now, you've inspired me as well, because I need to do mine. So I'm going to add that to my list. And then from the perspective of, and you mentioned this earlier, obviously, in your journey, there was that, I guess, that phasing of just allowing the grief, sitting with your life and that integration of what does it bring in from the perspective of meaning, and then into saying, okay, now let me look at this money and see what I'm going to do with it, and really empowering yourself and also educating yourself through that. And grief is obviously a really complicated journey. It differs for all of us. So what advice would you give if there's anyone who's listening who's received inheritance, or perhaps is waiting to hear of inheritance, but is feeling quite overwhelmed? What would you say? What guidance would you give them as they navigate this forwards path?
I think it is, take your time and be thoughtful about it, and maybe have a bit of a plan, or what I would say is, if you're getting a big lump sum of cash, especially if it's really emotional, like it kind of depends, I think, with death and grief, like how much of an emotional charge it is. And sometimes like, if it's a shock, or if it's, it depends where you're at in your life and things like that. And I think if you have a bigger lump sum, maybe you could also kind of portion it out to be like, okay, actually, do you know what, I'm going to say take 20% of it and let myself use it. And maybe with the other 80%, or whatever makes sense for you, I might just put that to the side for now and really do some education around finance, or try and find someone that can help me. Or maybe if you're someone that just understands all this stuff and, understands investing and is ready to go, you could kind of like make a plan for it. But I think often there's a bit of a gap in terms of, okay, what we actually know about money. And maybe if we are handling a slightly larger amount of it than we're used to, like there's probably a gap in some education that you could do there, and to kind of develop some more understanding around it, and just know your options as well. Because there are a lot of options out there in terms of what you can do with it and what it can mean for your life. And, especially if it's a bigger amount of money, like it can be really life-changing. And that's sort of like maybe a bit weird to admit sometimes. Or I think there's sometimes a lot of shame around, like, I think I felt weird about the money because like I hadn't earned it, like it wasn't mine. And, it's like a bit of a weird, I personally have had a bit of a funny relationship with it because it's like, doesn't feel like mine and I haven't earned this. So sometimes it's different than dealing with money that, maybe feel like more yours. I don't know, like it's going to feel different for everyone. But yeah, I think definitely like finding the right people, getting a bit of education around what you can do with it, because hopefully you want to be, making the most of it. And, especially like I learned a lot about investing, and because I kind of realized, okay, well, my time is really important. So if I can put my money into something that's going to pay me, that gives me a lot more wiggle room with my time and my life, actually. And yeah, maybe I don't want to just keep doing the same kind of life and then just having a slightly more luxurious version of it. Like maybe I could use this money to completely go on a different path. Yeah.
I love that. And that, for me, what came through is that real taking your time and being able to work out what's right for you. But I also love that acknowledgement that it can bring up complicated emotions around it, where it's that guilt of I didn't earn this. I'm thinking, when I was a kid, I used to feel guilty every birthday night. So the evening after my birthday, I remember I couldn't sleep because I used to feel really guilty for some reason about the fact that everyone's like giving me presents and I hadn't given them anything in return. So I could imagine that actually, it can bring up, and we know that in grief, all of these complicated emotions can come through. So I think that's a really beautiful awareness that can be brought in as well, but to receive that in a very compassionate way, and not have to rush with anything. Just allow it, and then see where you want to flow. And I suppose as well, because we often think, legacy after we die, and I think there's a beautiful legacy in that financial side of things as well. I'd be really interested to hear from you, Hannah, from your perspective, what's really important for you in your legacy on this planet. It could be very practical, but it also could be a different type of legacy. It could be anything. What feels important for you in your legacy? Have you ever thought about this?
Yeah, I have. To be honest, I haven't, and I find the word legacy is like feels a bit overwhelming. You're like, what's my legacy? And I'm like, I don't know, because I don't know. I think I'm trying to just really appreciate life as well, and I think sometimes death does give you that appreciation of life, and we can just try and do our best going through it, life, because it's a bit weird. It's like the human experience is all a bit odd, isn't it? It's like all a bit much and a bit weird, and trying to do our best. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just trying to like experience everything and appreciate being here. And I think, we'll see. I don't have children right now, so it's like I feel like maybe you have a different perspective on things when you maybe are in that situation. I don't know. Yeah,
I can imagine that. Yeah, for sure. It's true, actually. Legacy, it's a bit like when someone says, what's your purpose? And people, I've had people where they've said, when anyone asks me that, I go to like a Greta Thunberg level of purpose versus like, you just be rooted in the simplicity. But I love that, just enjoying our life. And that's the simplicity of it, which I think is really beautiful. And very much for me, my when I've thought about legacy, I think about, I just want to exit this planet in kindness and just know that I've impacted some people just through kindness and how I show up, and that's enough. That is more than enough. And when it can, and hopefully I do hope that there will also be obviously the financial side that I can pass on to hopefully my future children. And speaking of the financial side, I know that ethics are a big thing that you also talk about in your work. It's something that's really important for me. I actually moved all my pensions into ethical funds, and was also had to fight the fight in one of my workplaces as well of can we have our pensions somewhere ethical, and unfortunately lost that. So I actually had to move my pension out of their ones into a different one to be able to have it aligning with my values. So in a world that is very complicated and very concerning, how can we go on a money journey that is really in alignment with our ethical values, and knowing that our money is is doing stuff that is, I suppose, in alignment and not doing as much harm as it could be if we're really unconscious to it.
Yeah. And I think, harm reductive is kind of a good way to think about it, because, a lot of the financial industry and money it's a whole thing. And there's, lots of things that, with the climate crisis, let's give that example, and fossil fuel companies, like maybe we don't want our money going into fossil fuel companies, but, sometimes your investments or your pension will be going into banks, and then those banks actually fund fossil fuel companies. So it's really hard to do it completely perfectly. But I think we can try. And I think, switching your bank account is a really good first place to start as well, to the kind of banks that aren't doing as much of this financing with fossil fuel companies. So some of the banks that are quite good at, like Monzo and Starling, like the newer banks, they don't really do that. Or Triodos is like the really kind of ethical bank, and they have like really strong values. And then like you were saying, switching your pension is massive. There's this kind of company who have a campaign, they're called Make My Money Matter, and they did you see the study?
I haven't seen the study. I've seen some of their campaigns that they've done.
I think the stat was, again, I can't remember exactly, I think it was saying that changing your pension to kind of the slightly more responsible one from the kind of bog standard option is like 15 times more effective for your impact on the planet than never flying again, going veggie, and something else. So like all these like small actions, actually, like if we look at the financing of this stuff and we go kind of like up the chain to where the money is and start kind of changing the way where the money is flowing into which companies. And like in an ideal world, all my money would be invested in these amazing regenerative, like perfect, companies. And, at the end of the day, we are kind of normal people in, like I consider myself like wealthy in terms of what I have. I feel very lucky, but in the grand scheme of like my risk tolerance, like I'm not a billionaire who has, so many options that I can take really big risks with my money. Like it needs to fund my retirement and things like that. So you kind of need to stay within certain parameters that are available to you at the same time. So I've kind of had to accept maybe that nothing is like truly perfect when we live in a really imperfect economic system. And I'm kind of just trying to do my best. And the example I give is, I know you mentioned about zero waste as well, but I'm like, I can try and reduce my plastic consumption maybe. But equally, sometimes I might just want to go to the corner shop and like they've got something in a plastic tub, and like sometimes it's, you kind of have to accept that I'm not in a system that is set up for me to do all these perfect actions. And I feel a bit like that with finance. But I think, if you can look at changing your pension, your investments. So all my investments in the ESG version, which stands for environmental, social, and governance. And a lot of mine mainly work by screening out some of the really bad companies. And just having a bit more awareness around it. And also like where we spend our money, like trying to buy locally and support brands or secondhand. Like I always kind of think when I'm looking at buying stuff, does this already exist? Because if it already exists, then I might as well get it from somewhere else rather than buying another new thing.
We're all perfectly imperfect. And I'm definitely with you there. I used to be very strict on the whole zero waste for as much. And then I realized how restrictive that was and how it had me going from, I lived in Brixton at the time, going all the way up to, where was it? Muswell Hill, to the Planet Organic there, because I knew that their zero waste had certain things, and then going all the way across and it was just impossible to sustain it and live a life. And I realize actually we can all be perfectly imperfect, but actually those little actions that we can take, to your point around getting the next, the next most ethical pension and other actions, they do add up into tangible difference that does make that change in the world. But unfortunately our system in a lot of ways needs a lot of restructuring in order to really, I suppose, be accessible to us for everything that we need for it to be ethical. But I think that's really powerful. And when you shared around the bank side of things, I found that so simple to switch. That was something that I've been putting off. I was with Barclays, who I think are one of the worst. And I have been putting off that switch for so long that I was just thinking it's going to be a nightmare, and it's so easy. The banks do it all
Yeah.
for you, including all your direct, everything. It just switches. You just literally just fill out a form once, and they just keep you updated. So for anyone thinking about switching, I would say definitely just go and explore it, see who feels right for you. I like Triodos is my bank, and Monzo's another one that I really, from what I've seen and everything, I think are brilliant. But yeah, there's loads of options, and it's often easier than our mind is making it out that it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you talked around investing as well. Obviously, that is a big heartland of everything that you do, is to inspire us to use our money more wisely. And before we get to the final question, I just really wanted to root into what is for your typical, again, non-billionaire or someone at that level, what does it look like if I was to start investing? What could that look like? What sort of levels of investment? Because again, I suppose my perception of investing has always been you got to put big lumps of money into it. You know, that's, you got to ride the stock market, the sort of, I suppose, like the trader view that I see in films. But yeah, what could investing look like for someone like myself?
Yeah. So I used to have that perception as well. And I didn't invest in the stock market for such a long time because I thought it was like all for Wall Street. And
Mm.
now I'm like, oh my God, if I'd have started a few years earlier, that would have been just really helpful. So yeah, a lot of my work is around like teaching people these things and making it hopefully simple and easy because, you know, there are all these companies that are profitable and we're just buying bits of them. Like that's what investing is. You know, you're just like becoming an owner in a bit of this company and you're entitled to some of the money that they make. And if they grow and you sell your bits of the company, you'll make a bit of money that way as well. So that's what it is at its core. And I just keep it very simple. I just plan to kind of buy and hold mine for a really long time. So my stock market investments, I started in 2018 and they're up 94% since then. So in just over 6 years.
Wow.
Yeah, like, is it 6 years? Something? Yeah, just over. I think
Wow.
it's nice to share the numbers because I used to have no idea like what people, I didn't even know what it was, like how much it made or like how it worked or anything. So I think sometimes just planting those little seeds and, you know, I put kind of like the lump sum of cash in, obviously, with some of the money I had from my dad. So I did a lot of research to be comfortable that I wasn't going to lose it. But I also do now, like, I put £10 a month in for my best friend's children into their junior ISA because I
Yeah.
was like, I don't want to buy them stuff. They've got loads. And actually, this will add up by the time they're 18. They're going to have this, you know, fairly decent chunk because I've put in a bit, but also the investment return should make quite a decent kind of top it up a lot. It's going to give it a lot of kind of oomph and power behind it. So, you know, it'd be cool to see what they end up doing with it. So yeah, I think you can do it with these smaller amounts, and you know, you need to you need to understand what you're doing, and I would say like have a strategy or invested across lots of different companies. Like don't try and pick a few good companies. Like, you know, there's a thing called a fund, and they like bundle loads of companies together for you. So try and do that. And there's loads of good apps and things now, but yeah, it's definitely more accessible than it ever has been. And the small amounts do add up. And your pension is invested anyway. Like your pension is just in investments. So that made me feel a lot better because I was like, oh, the government literally really want us to invest in a pension. They even top it up for us. So if that's invested in the stock market and these companies, then it obviously isn't this, you know, crazy risky thing if we do it in the right way. And that really helped me have a bit of a mindset shift around it.
Oh, I love that mindset shift. I love that. And also I think from the mindset, just as you were sharing around the pension side, I remember when I started looking at my pension every single year, and that was really empowering too, because before it's just over here, not, and that is where you can really start to understand the fluctuations and stuff, but that actually there is that growth that is happening. So I think that, yeah, there's a lot of things, and I know that's all of your work is just breaking it down. Let's make it super, super simple. So yeah, I love that. Love that. Well, we'll come on to how people can connect with you and find out about everything you're doing and come into your world and seek your support. Before we do that, there's one question I always ask my guests, and this is if you could write a note to a past version of yourself, and this could be at any point in your life from where you're sitting now, what would you say? What words of advice, words of wisdom, or anything would you share with that version of you?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this, and like the first thing that popped in my head was just keep going. Literally, just
Ah,
keep going. You know, like I think sometimes, especially if you're well, one, if you're in like a tough position, it's like it will pass, like just, keep going. And also when you're creating this life that you really want to be living, you'll have lots of wobbles or moments of doubts, or when you're like, oh, I'm like, is this going to happen? I'm actually able to pull this off. And it's like, yeah, just keep going, like keep going after your dreams and keep pursuing the little intuitions that you have, and keep moving towards what you want, because it does all kind of add up and start coming together.
Oh, I love that. Keep going. Keep going. Keep flowing with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you make I feel like I've got really in tune with the financial mindset, but you make me think of that. I remember the first thing that really connected with me on pensions was that it was the growth that you see, but actually seeing that even with the bumps in the road and everything, that ultimately that the overall line is going up. And as you were sharing that, it just made me think about that in life as well. We have these little bumps in our road, we have those moments, etc. But to be able to keep going, we're still going, even if it's like that sort of journey, you are still going up that path. So really powerful. And so, Hannah, if anyone wants you in their world, if they want to find out more about you, to learn from you, where can they find you, and what is in your orbit that you want to shout about?
Yeah, I would say come say hi on like Instagram or LinkedIn, and maybe I'll give you the link to my website as well. And I think that if you're interested in the stock market and are, kind of understanding some of the big concepts, I have a 5-day free email course. So you get an email a day for 5 days, and it just breaks down the kind of big things that you need to understand, like inflation and compound interest, and some of these like jargony terms. But I think it's a really good place to start understanding these kind of things. And I do touch on the kind of values aligned way to do it as well. So I would, if you're someone that you have either like a bit of disposable income or some cash, and you're like, oh, maybe I could do investing actually, then go on that journey with the course and start learning about it. And I work with people one-to-one as well. If they have these kind of like bigger lumps of cash they need to kind of figure out as well. It's an alternative to financial advice. It's about you just like, understanding what your options are and how to navigate it. And hopefully, if you have this money, even if it comes from potentially like these not nice circumstances we wouldn't choose to be in, it's like, it is cool to be able to do things with it and learn more and potentially, make something different of your life and use it well. Yeah.
That's so beautiful. I love that. So empowering to understand those options is so empowering. So I actually was thinking about it. I was like, I'm definitely going to go sign up for those emails, because as well, there's so much stuff where you just showing that. And I was like, there's also loads of stuff I hear in the media that I'm like, I don't know what this means or how it impacts me. So actually, I think just to have that understanding of the terms can be really, really, really powerful.
It's like learning a different language is what I say. It's like if someone came and spoke to you in a language you didn't understand, you wouldn't expect to know it. But somehow with money, sometimes we're like, oh, I should understand this stuff. And it's literally a different language. Like, there's so many different words that you don't come across in the day-to-day.
Yeah, that's so true. You got me thinking as well about, for all of us who are like, I wasn't very good at maths at school as well. It could be additional mindset blocks of being like, I'm just not good at this, so therefore I'm not going to go there. But it's a whole different world to explore and understand. And Hannah, thank you so much for joining me today. This is, from my perspective, I think this is such an important conversation to be had, not just around inheritance, but just in general, and going deeper into that point of, you've literally blown my mind, of just 50 years ago around women and lacking that financial freedom, but also from that ancestral development and healing and growth perspective. It just feels like such an important conversation. So I'm so grateful to you for joining me today on Death on the Daily.
No, thanks for having me. Thanks for opening up the space to talk about it as well.
All of my gratitude to you for joining me for another Dead Conversation. Death on the Daily is edited by David Strutt. The music is Set Free by Katie Gray. And I am Tanya Wilkinson. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would be over the moon if you can rate, review, and subscribe. It really, really helps me to get the word out there. And if you want to say hi or to hear more about my work as a coach and death doula, including how I support my clients to navigate their death on the daily, then all of the ways that you can connect with me are in the show notes. I'll be back soon with some more dead conversations. And in the meantime, take good care of yourself and others.
There's a cold fire, there's a crossfire, and there's something